Okay, now we're recording. So, the Camino Ignaciano. Leave you with a little something to introduce you to St. Ignatius of Loyola. There is no need to run. It is not walking a great distance that fills and satisfies the soul, but rather tasting it internally. So, most of you are familiar with various Caminos de Santiago, especially the Camino Francis. But this Camino does not go to Santiago de Compostela. No, it goes the opposite direction, in fact. But it does cross the Camino Francis. And then it follows most of the Camino del Ebro towards Barcelona. And this is one of the official maps, if you will. So it's about 400 miles, and it was mapped and then marked with orange arrows in 2012. And then the guidebook was published in 2013. And this pilgrim route, instead of heading towards St. James, commemorates the famous journey made by Ignatius of Loyola in the year 1522 from his home in the Basque country of Loyola down towards Montserrat and Manresa. So we'll give you a little bit of background on St. Ignatius, born the end of the 15th century. And he was born Inigo de Loyola, who's the youngest of 13 kids. And he was reared in the arts of chivalry in the court of Ferdinand V of Aragon. And when he was young, he had this great love for the military. He also had a tremendous desire for fame. And he framed his life around the stories of El Cid, the Knights of Camelot, and les chansons de Roland, the songs of Roland. He joined the army at 17, and according to one biographer, he, quote, strutted about with his cape slinging open to reveal his tight-fitting hose and boots, with a sword and dagger at his waist. According to another biographer, he was a fancy dresser, an expert dancer, a womanizer, sensitive to insult, and a rough, punkish swordsman who used his privileged status to escape prosecution for violent crimes committed with his priest brother at carnival time. And he gave an example where, upon encountering a Muslim in Spain who denied the divinity of Jesus, he challenged him to a duel and then ran him through with his sword. That was just one of many men he had dueled with. At any rate, at 1509, at the age of 18, he took up arms for the Duke of Najera, and his leadership and diplomacy qualities eventually earned him a title of servant of the court, and which made him very useful to the Duke. And under his leadership, he participated in many battles without injury until he didn't in 1521. At the Battle of Pamplona, he was severely injured when a French Navarrese expedition stormed the fortress. And many of you who have walked the Camino Francis would have walked right by and through the doors or walls of this fortress. A cannonball hit him in the legs and wounding his right leg and fracturing his left in multiple places. So he was returned to his father's castle in Loyola, where in an era of no anesthetics or anesthesiology, he underwent several surgical operations to repair his legs, which were basically having the bones set and rebroken and set. In the end, these little operations left one leg shorter than the other, and he would end up limping for the rest of his life, and his military career was ended. But during his convalescence, he only had 2 books available to him in his father's house. One was The Life of Christ, and the other one's The Life of the Saints. And The Life of Christ was the one that influenced him the most, or would influence him the rest of his life. And it inspired him to devote himself to God and then follow the example of St. Francis of Assisi and other great figures of the church. It also inspired his method of meditation, especially since Ludolf, who wrote the life of Christ, proposed that the reader placed himself mentally with his imagination at the scene of all the gospel stories, like visualizing the crib at the nativity or placing oneself at the table at the wedding of Cana. And these techniques he would promote and incorporate with his spiritual exercises. So by the end of his convalescence, Ignatius resolved to dedicate the rest of his life to God, and especially to the conversion of infidels in the Holy Land. And if you note the date, 1522, when he set out for the port of Barcelona, and you know your history of the Middle East, the Holy Land was pretty much, firmly in control of, quote unquote, the infidels. But at any rate, this path that he took from Loyola, heading towards Barcelona, is the foundation of today's Camino Ignaciano. And and along the way, he would have visited many of the important ecclesiastical sites of the day, which are still, important today. But it was at the Benedictine monastery of Montserrat where he had his most profound mystical experience. Many of you might have visited Barcelona, and if you have enough time, people always say, make sure you go up to Montserrat, to the monastery. And this monastery was well known back in his day because it housed an ancient wooden statue of the Virgin and Child, one of the Black Madonnas of Europe, La Moreneta, they called her. Supposedly carved by St. Luke. It was taken to Spain, supposedly by St. Peter, and then hidden in a cave during the Moorish occupation. It was found in the year 880, and has since been venerated by thousands and thousands of pilgrims, and many miracles have been attributed to her through her intercession. Most historians would agree on that this is more of it's Byzantine style and later than 880, and it is not the original statue that they found in 880, but it's still, they're pretty sure it does go back to like the 12th century, I think. At any rate, it was here at Montserrat during an overnight vigil at the shrine that Ignatius experienced a vision of the Virgin and the infant Jesus. And that's where he laid his sword down at her feet and decided to be a different type of soldier for Christ. He was going to lay his armor down and would win the world over in the name of the lady he served, very chivalric, the Virgin Mother, but not through sheer militarism, but with militant mysticism, if you will. And this was what he was most concerned with during his convalescence and during his walk. And this is the essence of Ignatian spirituality, turning inward and asking these questions. What have I done with my life? Where am I going? And what difference does God make in my life? And he became aware that the first and most necessary thing for him was to know the end for which he was created. And that was the most important thing, was what God's designs for him needed to be accomplished. But Ignatius intended to go to Barcelona to catch a ship to the Holy Land. But, and this is the irony of the 500th anniversary of this walk occurring, 1522, is that there was a plague in the city and the whole city was locked down. So he couldn't get into Barcelona. So he walked on to the nearby town of Manresa, which at the time was a bustling city with a very renowned textile industry. He lived there for about a year, begging for his keep, and then eventually he was doing chores at a local hospital in exchange for food and lodging. But several months, he spent much of his time praying in a cave nearby where he practiced asceticism and praying 7 hours a day, but also writing the fundamentals, the foundation of his spiritual exercises. And this is the cave that is the final stop on the Camino Ignaciano. They've built a chapel right in it. And the Ignatian Spirituality Center is built all around this cave. So 1522, he's in Manresa, but by September of the following year, he made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land with his goal of settling there and then converting all those Muslims. He was there about a month when he was sent back to Europe by the Franciscans, who convinced him that his plan was a rather large undertaking and maybe he should reconsider. So back in Barcelona again, he was without any direction, and he decided that he needed to do some studies if he was going to be an effective evangelicist. How about that? He began at, I think he was about 30 years old, and he sat down with schoolboys to learn Latin, because remember, he was really immersed in military affairs before. He went on to the University of Barcelona, then Alcala, then Salamanca, and finally he headed up to the University of Paris. And there he studied for 3 more years, got a Master of Arts, and all the time living very austerely, but giving spiritual direction, especially, which is interesting, it did get him in trouble later on in Spain, especially to women and to people on the streets. And he continued this, as I said, practice later, and that's where he was suspected of heresy and arrested in Spain, etc. But it was in Paris. He gathered all his college buddies together, and about 1534, Loyola and 6 of his buds, and only one of whom was a priest, they took upon themselves the solemn vows of poverty and chastity, and they formed what would become the Jesuits. But only 3 years later was he ordained a priest in Venice. And it was in 1540, 6 years later, that the Pope confirmed the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits. And just to touch upon the key works of Ignatius, the key work was the spiritual exercises, and they were formed, the basis were formed in Manresa, later refined in Paris. But the idea of this work is to help one find out, discern what the will of God is in regards to one's future, and then to give you the energy, the courage, and the will to follow it. And it's usually a 4-week course traditionally, and under ideal circumstances, it's a 4-week retreat, actually, guided, 4 weeks of meditations, where you learn how to pray, how to avoid doubt, how to elect a vocation in life without being swayed by, as they call, love of the self, or selfishness or egoism, or of the material world. That's ideally. So the four exercises, the 4 weeks, they focus on sin, which meaning simply turning away from God. Everybody, sin is such a nasty word in our contemporary world, I suppose, but it just means turning away. And so for Ignatius, that meant pimping, plundering, and partying. Week 2, you're focused on Christ's ministry through reading of the scriptures. 3 is focused on Christ's suffering and death, and or the passion. And week 4, you focus on the joy of the risen Christ. So basically, those are the exercises. And for centuries, as I said, they were given as a long retreat in solitude and silence. And but they were never meant. He never wrote them only for monks and priests. He had 3 or 4 types of exercise depending upon the person: clerics, bourgeoisie, illiterates, lay people. So these days, the most common ways of going through them is a retreat. You do a retreat in daily life with morning prayer, and then it's about a months-long program of daily prayer, and then meetings once a weekend on Sunday afternoons or evenings. And there are many people in our chapter that have followed these here at Boston College, etc. So there's a little link for people that are interested in learning more, and it's a good primer, this website. But the bottom line, that the Camino Ignaciano was designed ideally to be an intentional moving retreat, a little taste of the spiritual exercises, if you will, while you walk. And anyone who's walked a Camino can tell you how meditative long distance walking can be, actually. So it's a 4-week walk, but it doesn't have to be intensely focused at all. You can just follow the orange arrows, the flecha naranjas, just by walking out. So just like any other Camino, you can make it as focused as you want or as free-flowing as you want. The lovely thing about the Ignaciano is that there's a website that's so extensive, an amazing compilation of resources, everything from the history of the way to the nitty-gritty of walking the way, practicalities, credentials, transportation, lodging, and spiritual preparation. And this is the type of thing you don't find on many other Camino websites. And in fact, most other Camino websites that you'll find are commercial ventures. This is all free. Everything's downloadable off of this website. So I encourage you to, if you're interested in walking, to peruse this. They give tips for how to begin meditation and how to incorporate it to your walking, to daily tips for each stage of the way. So it's a great website. This is the guidebook that was published along with it. I have worked with Father Iriberi, I won't say extensively, but I did bring him here, drove him all around the Boston area to BC, to Holy Cross, to BC High, where he and I, well, mostly him, but I also, chimed in on the presentation up at Holy Cross about this walk and why is it important to actually walk a Camino as opposed to walking for 3 or 4 days, jumping on a bus or getting in a taxi, or what about cycling it? Well, yeah, you can do it, but the walking is the most meditative. And until you walk, it's hard to comprehend the importance of the actual walking. So another resource for you with free advice from all over the world is the Ignatian, Friends of the Ignatian Camino Facebook page. Loads of people there ready to help you. So now you've heard this fabulous presentation by Moi-même, and you're saying, yeah, this is what I want to do this. So now for the practicalities of the Ignatian Camino, getting there. So it starts, as I said, in Loyola in the Basque country, which you will see spelled this way in Euskadi. Now, to get there, you could easily fly into Madrid. It's about a 7-hour total journey from the airport. There's a train that leaves around 10 o'clock, and then it drops you at this little town, Zumarraga, just a $4 bus ride, and there's a bus every hour. And coming from the East Coast of the States, the Iberia flight, for example, and most of the airline flights will land around 6 in the morning. So this is a very doable path to get up there. So Iberia also has a connecting flight to Bilbao, which arrives about, well, these are old schedules, but 8:40 in the morning, and you can take a bus directly right from the front of the airport. It sounds like a tight connection, but the Bilbao airport is tiny. You just walk out onto the front sidewalk and the buses pull up right there. You can go into Barcelona round trip because you're going to end up in Barcelona. So that's pretty handy. From the airport, a total journey of 7 hours. So meaning you have to get from the airport into Barcelona, you get the train. The train is great because one, you can snooze virtually the whole way. It's a 5-hour total train ride. And then it's only about a half an hour little bus ride from, again, Zumarraga. But what's really cool about this is, this was a well-traveled valley path, whatever, along the Ebro River. So when you are on the train, you actually go through nearly, I would say, well, 70% of where you'll be walking. So you can get a sense of the route while you're going. But if you land in Loyola, the buses from the airport leave every 3 hours. You get there and you have to change at Ibar, which to me, I was like, I was getting there at like 8 o'clock at night. I'm alone. I looked on Google Street Maps at what Ibar looked like. It didn't look very inviting. And then I get there at 8:30 at night and the flipping world is out. It's Spain. So it might be Basque Spain, but it's still Spain. There are grandparents and little kids and the cafes are bustling. And so I step off the bus and I have this huge sigh of relief, jet lagged, alone. I'm like, oh, this is easy peasy. Had a cup of coffee, a little bite to eat before the bus came. But you could also, alternatively spend the first night in Bilbao and get rid of a little bit of jet lag, visit the Guggenheim, visit Bilbao while you're up in the north. It's up to you. But I always recommend people using a search engine first, and make sure you use the drop-down box and select the multi-city option, because you've got to get back home from Barcelona. So if you flew into Bilbao, you want to be flying home from Barcelona. So as I always say, my experiences with particularly Iberia, they often throw in the additional flight, like the leg from, say, Madrid to Bilbao, or for a few dollars, and certainly less than paying for a train or a bus ticket. So this will save you time on at the front part of your journey. So again, we're back to, I wanted to add also, use a search engine, but always book with the airline itself, because they will have to honor your ticket. If you book through a third party, Cheap Flights or Air Gorilla or whatever those are, they don't have to honor your ticket if your flight gets canceled or changed or whatever. But so search for the best flights for you with the search engine, and then go directly to the website to book it. All right, so a 4-week walk. But like I said, it starts where you decide to, and it ends where you decide to. And I will outline the 4 weeks, but I have suggestions also for shortening it if you don't have or you don't want to walk all of the Camino. The first week, I highly recommend walking because it's absolutely spectacular. You walk from Loyola through the Basque mountainside down through to Logroño, which, if you recall, some of you will recall, is on the Camino Frances. You can pick up your credencial, where you can have it stamped on your way for presenting it in Manresa. And you can pick it up in Loyola or in Logroño or in any of the major towns along the routes all the way down. Loyola is a gorgeous town in the foothills of the Basque country. There are 3 places to stay right within Loyola itself, but there are also there's towns to 15 minutes to the east, and also there's Zumarraga to the west that you could stay in if you wanted to. But because the town itself is small, there are some restaurants and bars, but like I said, you can walk 15 minutes to the little town to the east if you want some more options. Your option, in Loyola, you can, if you time it right, you can actually schedule a treat there before you leave. You can visit his home where he convalesced. They have masses every day in the basilica there, often in the Basque language, which leads me to speaking a little Basque. As I always say, you don't have to be fluent in anything to travel in Spain, but you really do yourself a disservice if you don't learn a little bit. So kaixo, I should say, is hello. And these next 2 are the most important. Mesedes, which is please, and eskerrik asko is thank you. Agor is goodbye. Eganon is good day or good morning. And the one you hear on the trail all the time is opa, which is just sort of it's almost like Altrea. I don't know. It's encouraging, go on witches or something. But everyone I passed on the trail, the locals all said opa to me. But these 2 are the most important. And I'll tell you, the Basque people have a reputation for harshness, especially their demeanor, if you will, but they're not. And I learned these 2. And with the bus driver alone that night that I landed, I said, Loyola Mesedes. And he looked at me and he said, we had this grumpy look on his face, like this easy. And I said, eskerrik, because I didn't know how to pronounce it. Eskerrik, and his face completely changed, huge smile, and he said, "Se eskerrik," and then dropped me off right where I needed to be dropped off, wished me luck, and he was not the first person whose demeanor changed, because they are very proud and they truly appreciate people recognizing their culture, because they are not Spanish, they are Basque. And they'll know immediately that you're not a local, and they'll know probably that you're not even Spanish. So they really warm up to you if you learn those 2 words. So your first day out, you're going just 11 miles, which is short for Camino standards, and it's a great warm up. The website has its whole physical guide with a detailed description of the walk. It also has where your lodging is, taxis, which is something you should write down for each day, because there is limited public transportation on this route, and this section, I should say. And I highly strongly urge people to book the first week's accommodations ahead of time. There's not a lot of them, not a lot of places to stay. There's small little hotels or casa rural, so it's important to do that. And then they also have interesting facts about the walk, some historical tidbits. And lastly, they have your Ignatian tips, your spiritual guide, preparatory prayer, reflections, what you might be thinking about, or perhaps suggestions to be thinking about, some scripture readings before you start out. And then you'll see that on the website, you can download the trails. I found them very, very well marked, but as you know, every year there could be some kids that move a rock with an orange arrow, turn it a different way. If you want to, you can, if you have Wikiloc on your phone, you can view it on that, or you can just download the actual map to your phone. But it's an easy 18 kilometers or 11 miles, but you have all day to walk it. And it's a gentle, this doesn't look so gentle on the map, but you barely know you're walking uphill. And it's mostly along an old railway track. And for downloading, I put this in here. When you get to Wikiloc, make sure you have Jose Luis. He's Father Iriberi. This is the official guide. A lot of people are walking in and around here, so a lot of people upload their own tracks that they've recorded. But make sure that you download Jose's with the Ignatian symbol there. So, and then to start, you face the sanctuary and you turn right. And there's your first orange arrow. You'll see that it has the grand route marks there, but you should have no problem finding those. Gentle walking paths, lots of people out walking and exercising. The Basque country it's very well to do, and everything's very clean and nicely organized. I mean, look how beautifully clean the square is. This is the as Scotia. I misspoke when I said you could stay in Zumaraga. This is maybe 20-minute walk from the sanctuary, this first little town where you could stop for a cafe con leche. We went into the church of Santa Maria here. And then you continue through, and there's your railway. You're on the railway bed, which they have, ingeniously installed motion sensors in the tunnel. So when you walk through, they all light up. But again, it's a pretty rural area. I would say it's old Spain, but it's not old Spain, because for the Basques, it's not Spain. And you hit your first place after 11 miles. If you're lucky, you can find a place that is still open. You'll probably arrive around 2:30, let's say. But this is not like the Camino Santiago. This is really Spanish time. So you might be able to grab a small bite before everything shuts down and reopens at like 8 or 9 o'clock. So the Pilgrims Timetable is very different on the Camino Ignaciano. We stayed at this small little pension. It's going to be more expensive, the Camino Ignaciano, especially the first week, because there's one albergue, and I'll mention that coming up. But until you get down to Logroño, near the actual Camino de Santiago, there are no albergues, and the hostels are they're significant way off the route. Like, you don't want to be walking another 3 or 4 kilometers off the route at the end of the day. So day 2, you're walking to the sanctuary of Arunzatsu. And again, you're on the old railway track. This gal was a gal I met on the Camino Primitivo. She lives in Barcelona, Masha. And I was walking by myself. I left the States by myself. And in the airport, I think when I was waiting for my connecting flight, she said, my boss gave me the week off, so I'm coming. So she just hopped on the train from Barcelona and came on up. So again, a gentle walking day until you get about 4 kilometers where you can go into the supermarket, buy some stuff for the next 2 days, because now you're really going up into the mountains. So you might need a few sneaky snacks, for during your day hikes. Fabulous, fabulous cafe here. Most of the pilgrims, they recognize this place. It's a piece of heaven. It's run by some sisters, and the bread, and it's daily bread is what it says in, in Basque, Madi. And it's a panaderia, pasteleria, cafeteria, gorgeous coffee and whole grain breads. But then you start climbing. Some people actually take a taxi from Zumarraga to this reservoir. This is one of the first things you hit, and it's not very far up, but in order to shorten the day, because this is once you hit the reservoir, then you really start climbing. And it's just beautiful. You're lucky if you see one other person. We didn't see another person at all once we left that cafe. One car drove by us before we hit the reservoir. So it's just gorgeous. It's very well marked. A friend of mine did this in April, and she was walking in about 8 inches of snow up here. But you're in this surreal landscape. I've never seen one like it, actually. Just wild. But again, there are the arrows. You just keep following them, and you arrive at Arunzatsu, which is another Marian shrine. The Virgin in 15th century appeared in a hawthorn bush, and that's what that means. Arunzatsu means you in the hawthorn. She appeared to a shepherd, and so people have been making devotions and pilgrimages there. And this would have been well known in Ignatius' time as well. 1468, 69 is when it was. But now there's a beautiful chapel. Looks kind of brutalist there, of course. It's 1950s, but you get up close and it's really stunning. And the interior is spectacular. It's breathtaking. You can imagine, when you build something like this, just how familiar this sanctuary is to most Spanish people. They have buses that come up here, etc. It was quite quiet when I was there. There's a number of accommodations up here. If this is your second day, this small hotel was there in Ignatius's time, and most likely he did stay there. Well, they actually claim he did when he traveled through. That was booked. This is the view from my little hotel, Sandica. It was stunning. But now there's a brand new albergue there, so you can stay there as well. But you wake up the next morning, you sit outside with that lovely view, you have your coffee. You maybe review the day ahead, what's coming up in front of you. The outer trail, now the inner trail, if you're going to be following an intentional Camino. And you head around the building and you head on up, back even further up into the mountains. These lovely woodland paths, and suddenly you break open into the high pastures. So if I thought the day before was surreal and I've never seen anything like it, this was spectacular. Spectacular. This is not what most people think of when they think of Spain either. And stunning sheep. And now there were a lot of day hikers in this high valley. They came up from the other side. There is a refugio up there. It's open not most of the year, but the good parts of the year. You can get a coffee or what have you. But again, well marked. And then you're going to see, this is the Basque Camino to Santiago. So you're crossing different Caminos coming down from the Pyrenees. But you make your way down and you're now in the foothills in the lovely old town. And again, not too long a day each day. Even the third day is only 13 miles. Beautiful. Again, we saw on this day we saw 2 hunters. I think that's about it. So you're climbing, actually you'll be climbing up, and you don't go up here. You're looking at it going, oh, are we going to head up that way? No, you skirt under the ridge here. But then you get to this huge high plateau with cliffs that overlook all of the Navarre. It's just stunning. And so now you're coming down here and you're actually looking out at the Camino Francis. So this would be Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, Pamplona. So when you're at that ridge, you're looking down at this wide valley. And hold on, there we go. So this is the only people or things we saw today, that with 2 hunters up in the trees and sheep. And then there you are. The arrows are there. I love this quote. Pilgrims are like treasure hunters, driven by the hunger for discovery, but the pilgrim seeks internal treasures, forgiveness or reconciliation, a new direction or course in life, confirmation of a major life choice, or a renewed or rediscovered sense of personal identity. And that sort of sums up what the Camino Ignaciano aspires to be, or to help people achieve, if you will. And there's my little background. There's Masha. You see these all over the Camino Francis as well. This is a very rural area. One of the places to stay here, you stay in a farmhouse basically. But you continue on, and again, through rural Spain, we saw on this day, well, we saw no other pilgrims the whole time we were walking, not any, just locals. Some people mightn't like that, but some people eat it up because you're really immersing yourself in the culture. These communities are struggling to maintain their identity. A lot of weekenders come into the villages. The farms are consolidated, so they're bigger, but fewer people, in daily life. This is why I say you can't undertake these on the fly, because there's so few people and few accommodations, infrastructure, that you really need the reservations. But the rewards on this are great. It was a beautiful 1 week walk. There was always a place at the end of the day to get a bite to eat, and a cold, frosty one. I happened to stay on the third day up in this sanctuary up above on the hills. It was I guess it was like a retreat center, but we were the only two in the whole building. The woman picked us up down below at the cafe, drove us up there, cooked us supper, and then left us with the keys and told us to lock up in the morning and just throw the keys in the door. And I think it probably slept 120 people. It was in separate rooms. This was not like a hostel or albergue. So it's a very different experience than a Camino Ignaciano. Oh, that's the one I meant to take out, delete. I didn't put the map in there. But the next day, so you're wandering through all the farmlands. Again, beautiful scenery. Again, didn't see any other pilgrims. Came into small towns. Maybe the bread and fruit van was there. We bought supplies from them with all the old ladies for their daily shopping. We're queuing up with them. And then we're now climbing. This is the last climb that we have. And it looks like a lot, but we came along a ridge. But this is the last big climb before we hit Montserrat, quite frankly. And you get up to the top and look over, and you're, again, all looking down into the Navarra region. We happened to miss an orange arrow somewhere, and we ended up going by this Neolithic site, which we shouldn't have been near, but it's a benefit for getting lost. We found our way back easily, and you're coming down through all the vineyards. You're very close to Logroño, the Rioja region, and you end up in this gorgeous town, LaGuardia. Now, I stole this photo off the internet because it was pissing rain by the time we got there. So I have almost no photos. I have 2 photos of this town, but it's a charming walled town, as always on the Camino, defensively built on a hill. So after 15 miles of walking, you have to climb up, as always. But it is lovely. And it is a place where, wine snobs, if you will, that are going on their wine tours will stay, because it's surrounded by vineyards. But it's charming, and it's all pedestrianized in the middle. This is one of my photos. The next morning, it was just coming down in buckets that afternoon. Walled town, and there's Our Lady, wishing you a good journey as you leave. And you walk out, and you're right back through the vineyards of the Rioja, and straight through them. You reach a little town of La Barca, because they call it La Barca because this is where the ferry, before that bridge was built, would carry the travelers across. And here's your map. And you might be wondering why Ignatius went this way when he was heading this way. And the reason being is that he was heading to Navarrete, which was the palace of the Duke of Nejera that he used to work for. So he was fighting for him when he was wounded, and he remembered that he owed him money. So Ignatius stopped in there to collect it. And then he got his money, and he left word for it to be distributed to several persons in Navarrete that he felt he owed money to. So he's making reparations for his pretty dicey life before. And then he dismissed the 2 servants that left Loyola with him, gave them money and said, "You're done. I'm on my own now." In fact, you can actually stay in the Duke's palace, in the home there where Ignatius stayed when he lived in Navarrete, if you wanted to. But from Navarrete, you're now walking on the Camino Francis, but you are walking the opposite direction. Sort of a fish swimming upstream, which is what Ignatius himself felt at the time like he was doing, throwing it all away to walk a different path. And there are all the familiar signs, in Logroño. I love Logroño. I always say it's a great place to take a rest stop because it's a vibrant university town. It's really like a city. Has this infamous, fabulous tapas alley where you can have a wonderful night just bopping. As I say, you bop from this place to that place to this place to that place. Just having a little tapas and a small little caña with each one. And the beauty of it is, it's $11. So with your, actually not tapas, pinchos, I should say. That's what they call them up there. And this is where Masha left. She came for the first week and then she had to go back to work. So that's the first week of the Camino. And the rest of it is flat. So it's very easy, but the scenery is not nearly as dramatic because you are now entering the agricultural heartland of Spain. It's the breadbasket of Spain, between fruit trees and asparagus fields. It's all through here. And I said flat, flat, flat. So there's not a lot to see, if you will. I usually love the Meseta. This section was very hard for me, and mainly because I was completely and utterly alone. I walked every day and alone and saw nobody, not a soul, until I entered one little village in the middle of it or at the end of the day. And I can read Spanish okay because of my French and my Italian, but I can't really converse in it. So I would end up by myself 24/7. So, but I'm not so sure I would skip it because the towns in between that you reach in between are spectacular. It is wonderfully meditative, but again, as a single female, it was a little disconcerting. There are some rewards. There's some of the fruit trees. You're always assured of a snack along the way. I would never pick them. I would find them at the bottom of the trees. Beautiful mystical mornings, misty and mystical. But if you're under time constraints, because I love the towns in this section so much, what I would suggest as an alternative is to rent a mountain bike from Logroño and ride this section. Because I personally would not want to have missed these towns. There's my lunch table right there, me and my tomato, because I went in September, so there's lots of ripe tomatoes around. All the sheep, the local farmers bring the sheep in to glean the fields after the harvest. And you're running right around the Ebro River. So even if you didn't want to cycle, you could walk a little bit, pick up the train, pick up a bus. It's a big corridor in that section of Spain. And again, at the end of each day, there was a fairly good sized town. And these towns were very, very wealthy in their day because land equaled wealth. And the monuments to their wealth were their churches and their colleges. This is Calahorra. And I took these photos because these were all the, I don't know what they actually call them, but it's what the men during the Holy Week festivals carry on their shoulders. And they're almost full size representations of, like, there's the Last Supper. What was this one? Oh, this is part of the stations, I think. This is this fellow and his girlfriend are the only 2 pilgrims I met the entire 4 weeks. And they were walking to Santiago. They weren't walking my direction. So I only saw them one night. So there you go. So you can see that here's the handles that the guys pick up and they put them on their shoulders. They would have carried this as well on their shoulders and during the Holy Week celebrations. This one as well, the crucified, or no, not yet crucified, actually. I don't know which station this is, like the 9th station. Could it be anyone? But yeah, so you see how they rest them on their shoulders. This actual town had the most fantastic albergue. And this was the restaurant on top of it. There were two young hipsters that opened it, and the food was spectacular. And the albergue was lovely, really new and clean. And but this is the only meal I shared with anybody for the next week. The next day, you're back out. These are agricultural warehouses, more orchards. But again, I don't steal stuff. I just pick them up off the ground. Very, very rich in history. Today, the next town we hit was Alfaro, which is famous for its storks, actually. They're trying to reinvent themselves as a agro tourism type center with cooking schools and tours of local vineyards, etc. Struggling a little bit because they have to compete with the Rioja, but it's a lovely little town. Again, very, very wealthy towns. Land was the major currency. All wealth was derived from land, just about unless you were in South America getting gold. But these las cigüeñas, the storks, if you happen to walk through there in June, they're all nesting. You'll see them anyways, all times of the year, but the rooftops filled with them. It's the largest, it's not really a sanctuary, but nesting ground, if you will, this college itself for storks in the world. So I talked about, being alone as a woman. I walked into this town, and my friend who had walked this route a year or a few months, no, just 6 months earlier, she said to me, you have to go into the tourist office, and this is where you get the key to the albergue. And she said, the woman's name is Camino. Her actual name is Camino, and she's lovely, whatever. And she could speak English. So I had a lovely chat with her, and she said, how do you like it so far? And I'm like, well, I love it, but I'm a little anxious, being a single woman alone. And she said, oh, are you afraid of animals? And I looked at her, I said, oh yeah, well, the two-legged kind. And she looked at me back and she said, but this is Spain. And so I put this chart up here about violent crime. And Spain is like out of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So these are all industrialized Western societies. I look at that. There's Brazil for you, Kelly. Spain is the 8th safest. The US is 15th. Brazil is 40th. The type of violent crime, this is people feeling so safe walking at night. Gender inequality, they were referring to professional opportunity, that sort of thing. It's one of the safest countries in the world to walk in, especially at night, because the entire family is out at night. So my anxieties that I had while walking, etc., were completely for naught. I mean, I never really felt danger. It was just all internal, no external danger. It was just, I was making stuff up, having come from a big city in the States. So still agricultural heartland, flat, beautiful town, Tudela, serpentine streets, Arab and Jewish quarters. This was one time known as, what's the name of it? Banu Kazi. This is one of these towns where all religions were tolerated. So you had Jews, Arabs, and Mozarabs, the Iberian Christians who, they were Christians, lived under Arab rule, spoke Arabic, but they never converted from Christianity. So meanwhile, the guy that ran the town at this time, his brother was a Christian ruler in the north, up in Navarra. So there was a whole mixed bag of languages spoken in this town. Again, very, very vibrant. All around it was farmlands and flats, but it would come alive every afternoon. And a great place to explore. But then out you go, right back out into the heartland again with the irrigation canals. And there's the train that you would have taken from Barcelona, running by a couple times a day. Abattoir, sounds of the abattoir. You can see the pigs in there. But there was also the Royal Canal that you follow along. This was built in late 18th century. And there it was built to transport all the goods to these now big urban centers of Barcelona and Burgos. So it's a beautiful walk. You see the Mozarab influences. You know, Spain was conquered by the Arabs from 711 until Ferdinand and Isabella finally expelled the last of them, if you will, in the mid 15th century. So these are all their descendants, and they brought their culture, and it stayed. And these beautiful churches that were a mesh of both cultures and history, lovely and very well maintained. And then the end point of this week is the gorgeous city of Zaragoza, which is the 5th largest city in Spain, and it's a university city. But most importantly, it is the site of the Basilica of Our Lady of the Pillar, Nuestra Señora del Pilar. I arrived there the day or two after her feast day, where there are crowds of people, and you can see this mountain of flowers to Our Lady. You can see how big it is by the people here at the front of it. And this is where I talk about Our Lady, who I call the world's first cheerleader. So going back to St. James, he was preaching in this area, and he got very discouraged, and he was on the banks of the Ebro River, like about to throw it all in. And suddenly Our Lady appears to him on a pillar, for some reason, on a pillar, and says, no, keep going. You can do this. But build me a little chapel right here, you know, to keep in mind, for the locals to pray in. And it was the first Marian apparition, if you will. So you have Lourdes and you have Fatima, but this is the first. And in fact, she was still alive, if you follow the history. So they call it a bilocation. They don't call it so much an apparition. Of course, it is an apparition, but she was still alive. So anyways, she said, this place is to be my house, and this image and the column shall be the title and altar of the temple that you shall build. And so when you go into, there's the pillar, but she's at rest on a pillar. That's a silver one. The image was never dusted in over 2,000 years. No one is allowed to touch it, but 4 priest caretakers and newly baptized infants. The communists dropped bombs on this shrine during the Civil War in 1936, but the 2 that hit the church failed to detonate. So this is really what they say is the power of Our Lady. The day I was there was a baptism. You see him in his dress, the little boy or girl. I don't even know if it's a girl or boy, but the only ones that are allowed to touch the pillar are the babies. And there is this group of young men that see him in his red garb, and they carry the infant with their siblings. So the parents are here. They bring the infant and present he or she to Our Lady. And it's quite an honor to be chosen as what they're called infantes, that special group of young men that bring the babies up. And this was a great little ceremony. There was a lot of tears and photography. It was so sweet to see the 4 boys handling the baby and bringing him to Our Lady. So the pillar itself that she came in is jasper. It's unmatched anywhere in the world. It does not come from Spain. This is part of the mystery of it, as usual. But Zaragoza has also a Goya museum. It has a lively, because it's a university city, so lots of restaurants, a nice place to take a break, which happened to me because I had excruciating tendinitis and had to stop walking for 2 days. I also had the 3rd week coming up, which is Zaragoza de Lleida. And this is where you might make another decision, because it is all desert. You're now walking into Los Maregros, and it might not be your cup of tea. It's desert, and in some places they're reclaiming it with irrigation. You'll see that from the train. But it is tough, and it is hot. Even in October, it would be hot. I stole these pictures off of Google Maps because after walking that second flat week, and I literally hobbled into Zaragoza, I said, I can't do this. So my suggestion is, if this is not for you, because some places there aren't even in one place, there's not even a place to stay. You have to either taxi forward or taxi backward. You might just jump on the bus or jump on the train to skip forward. And this is where you have these little options, which is great with this Camino, because it's on this major thoroughfare, if you will. You could do, instead of doing 4 weeks, you could do a 1-week Camino where you take the high speed train from Barcelona to Lleida and walk that week, the last week. Great one, especially for Americans, because they don't get a lot of vacation, is a 2-week Camino where you get up to Loyola, you walk the first week, take the high speed train to Lleida and walk the last week. And you could do a mixture of all of the above. What I did is Lleida is you'll often see called La Vida in Castilian, just so that you don't get too confused. I took the train to Lleida to kind of keep on my walking schedule after resting my foot. I went backwards here to Fraga to then start walking forwards. Then again, uphill to Fraga. And now you're in Catalonia. So for those of you who don't know, Franco's regime after the Civil War, he was in power from 39 to 75. He had Spanish nationalism as its foundation, and he forbade the use of local in I don't want to say indigenous, but cultural languages. So Basque, and even his own language, that he was from Galicia, he forbade the speaking of Gallego, and he wanted everyone to be speaking Castilian. But they spoke it at home, even though they weren't allowed to speak it in public. And now it is surging. You hear mostly Catalan in Catalonia, and their pride is everywhere because now there's the whole movement to secede for independence. Excuse me, the whole movement of independence to secede. But again, I always say, be a good visitor and learn just a few words. Catalan is a lot easier than Basque because you'll notice there's some crossovers from French and to Spanish. So, hola, bon dia, si es plau, gracias, adeu. So it's very close, so adeu looks like adieu in French, gracias, obvious. And si es plau, s'il te plaît. I didn't have trouble with Catalan because of my French. Again, the first day trekking out of a city, never so great. We all know that is from the Camino de Santiago. When you're in a city, walking into or out of it is never really that great. Lots of pavement, but fabulous graffiti along in this area. I mean, I would have come up to here on this wall. This is how big this is. And then, but soon you're right back out into agricultural heartland. These are all solar panels, which I thought was wildly innovative. And more fruit trees, netting to protect against the birds, olive trees, reminders that you're in Catalonia. We will be what we want to be is what that says. Now, I walked this, in 2016, just to give you an idea. But again, you're walking on a Camino de Santiago route still, but going the opposite way. But then you take a small little detour here down to this town of Verdú, which was to me a must-see town, because this is where a very famous character, I shouldn't say character, saint, Jesuit came from. It's the birthplace of Père Claver. It's a little detour to the town of Verdú, very well marked. You'll see now that in Catalonia, they're promoting it, and they have these signposts with the Ignatian symbols, besides the arrows that Father Edeberri painted. Lots of reclamation of land. Now they're turning a lot of it over to vineyards. You can see the vineyards down here. But as I say, at the end of the day, you want the cold beer at the end. Or you can see how rural it is, like the farmer's pulling in for his. Verdú is a gem of a town. And like I said, the birthplace of Père Claver. He was born, 70 years after King Ferdinand sold the first 250 African slaves in Lisbon. And he got them in his new territories in New Spain, or what we call Colombia today. He joined the Jesuits in Tarragona and volunteered for those Spanish colonies in 1610. So he then sailed over to Cartagena, and he had 6 more years of study before he became a priest after that. But he could not believe the treatment of these human beings and the living conditions of the slaves as they came off the boats from Africa. Because Cartagena was a huge slave trading hub. That 10,000 slaves a year were brought in there. They estimated that he converted over 300,000 slaves. It's an estimate. But he himself slept in the slave quarters, fed them, took care of them, nursed their wounds. At the end, he died literally of sickness, but alone, and starved by and abused by an ex-slave that he had freed and he had hired to work for him. Really kind of tragic. But you stay in his actual home. They've converted his home into an albergue. There's a gorgeous restaurant in this teeny little town right down the street, a parrilla, with they grill everything in there. There's incredible local wines, and these are some of the best wines we had on the whole trip. This is a local tradition there. Because pilgrims need rewards too. This is I love the name, Bru de Verdú. And because the next day is really short, you can do as we did. We took a little tour of the church or the winery. So you see, it's well marked. That woman in front was a friend who came over to walk this last bit with me. And the other gal her name was Veronica. She was a Romanian that had relocated to Spain. And she was the caretaker of the albergue. Lovely, sweet, awesome gal. And she brought us to the church and to the museum. And you can climb up the tower. It's beautiful inside. Look out over the vineyards in the countryside. But we found out that we discovered this area of Catalonia in the mornings. This is what it looks like every morning at this time of year, at least. Overcast, misty, it's like San Francisco. But then soon it breaks out, and you're only a short walk to your first coffee stop. Beautiful, beautiful church in this first town. I just forgot the name of it, but Santa Maria de Diablo. So it looks like your classic, 16th century Spanish church. But when you go inside, the walls of light. He's a local. This artist still is. I think he painted in the last 10 years. He was born in Tarrega, in this town, and all of the walls have been painted these amazing, amazing murals, scenes from the Bible. It's stunning. The combination of like Baroque and modern, super. But you're still on the Camino. You can see there's the Camino de Santiago signs, plenty of fountains, plenty of sneaky snacks, as I say. These are pomegranates. I wouldn't take those because that was someone's private house. Lots of sheep. Sun's breaking out by it takes a while, around 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock it breaks out. And you're heading to Cervera. And of course, another defensive town where you have to climb all the way up at the end of your day, where we stayed in Sagrada Familia, a convent actually. And we stayed in these novitiate cells. We're the only 2 people there. Cervera is this very cool old defensive town. It used to be a university town before it was relocated to, I think, Barcelona, I guess is where they relocated, with their streets underground, the Witch's Alley. Nice restaurants. It's a sort of a weekend place for people from Barcelona. There's Sister Rosa, all 3'11" of her. She is one of, at the time, one of 6 sisters left at the convent, but they still run it for all the pilgrims coming and going. Misty mornings, there you go, down through the defensive walls, out into the fields. But you see what this is, slurry. It's October. So off you go, still wandering, very rural, gorgeous weather. You can see it was like we're in shorts and short sleeve shirts. You start out layered. So cool mornings, but warm afternoons. And then the slurry. So this is what we're doing now in the pandemic, but you walk by a field that they've just fertilized and you really got to cover up. So this is a great place. We're walking to Igualada. This is where my husband met me. He had taken the train out from Barcelona. And the last day you're walking up to Montserrat. So it's a great place if someone's going to meet you. And the walk is spectacular because unlike most people that come up to Montserrat from Barcelona on big tour buses, you're coming up from behind through this national park. And it's just stunning. Misty morning again, as usual in Catalonia, but you start to get, glimpses of the peaks. And then you're walking along the road, but it's early and there's no traffic because nobody's up there in the morning. So no one's coming down at you. And it's too early for the tour buses to be passing you at any rate. But you jump off the road, you're only there for a short time, and you walk up onto the trail of the Camino del Degotal. And this is, I don't know how long it was, 1 or 2 kilometers. And every 20 yards maybe was artwork dedicated to Our Lady from different villages and municipalities across Catalonia. All along the walkway. You can see there's one, and all down through here. And now you're walking up above where the tour buses went. And so you come into Montserrat, this gentle, peaceful arrival above all the tourism, because there's a lot. By 11 o'clock, it's bustling up there with vendors and tourists. But the lovely thing is there's 3 places to stay up top. And as a pilgrim, you're allowed to spend 2 nights at any of these places. And everyone leaves and the solitude arrives. And it's just magic. We stayed at this hotel only because at the time I couldn't find a link to contact the albergue here. But they've now moved it and put it in another building. So I would totally recommend staying at the hostel albergue there. And there's a third option, apartments, but those are usually for people that are spending a week up there on retreat. But you can explore the Basilica, which is gorgeous. You can attend, there's a world famous boys choir that performs every day at 1. And there's also Vespers at night. And they also sing on Saturdays and Sundays. And of course, most people go to pay homage to Our Lady of Montserrat, or La Moreneta. And she is the patron saint of Catalonia and one of the symbols of Catalan identity. And as I said, supposedly carved by St. Luke and brought to Spain by St. Peter. So you visit her and then you go down the Camino de l'Ave Maria. Each candle has been lit as a prayer to Our Lady. It's beautiful. Pilgrim's meal at the hotel for like 12 euros. Lovely. And the next day you can get up to the sound of bells, but no tourists. And again, it's wrapped up in clouds most of the day. I did this. You'll love this. This is high speed. Kind of cool. And when it lifts about 11 to 12 o'clock, you can explore. There are hiking trails all around the monastery. So when you get there in the afternoon, you've missed the boys' choir. Maybe you're too tired. You haven't gone to Vespers. The next day you can wake up, see any of those quote unquote attractions, and then take a hike and explore. No backpack, very light. You're practically dancing down the trails. Stunning views over the valleys, back towards the monastery, out down towards Barcelona. And they're all over. You pick any number of trails. And then you're at your final day. And one of the most beautiful walking days I've ever had in Spain. Back down Camino de l'Ave Maria and out onto the trail on the backside again. Well marked. Variety. I mean, mostly, it was almost all off trail walking. Little chapels, small little places to stop and eat. That wasn't an issue either. And this is John's second day walking, so it was great for him too. And then you arrive. You're getting closer to they try to retrace exactly where Ignatius walked 500 years ago, and he would have walked by this very winery. And this place, they hosted Saint Ignatius in 1522, and they were there for since like 1,000 years before, it says, 1,000 years history before. But they are so devoted to Ignatius, they actually have a chapel in the 17th century chapel there. But it's still they leave their door open to pilgrims, and they'll offer you a glass of wine if you happen to stop in. And soon you're overlooking Manresa. This is a tower there. There was a convent there that Ignatius would have stopped in as well, but it was demolished in the First Carlist War, and they built a defensive tower up top there with like garrison and cannons put in place because it had a great vista over the city. So you can see Manresa laid out before you. There's the on the right is the Ignatian Spirituality Center, and the basilica on the left. The basilica had been there since 880, since the year 880. It was destroyed by, the Islamic ruler of Iberia, Al Mansur, in 999, I think it was. And then it was rebuilt. So it's been there for, how many years is that? 1,520 years? I don't know. Not good at math. So you're up and you're looking down, and you walk around and descend towards it. And this is the first thing we see. Do you see that? And this is a response to what's been going on basically in Barcelona. Why it's here in Manresa, I don't know. But all the Airbnbs that have overtaken Barcelona so that the locals have nowhere to live. They can't afford it. So this is what greeted us as we turned the corner. There's the spirituality center. There's the steps down. It's like, that's what they think of us. But at any rate, you walk over the same bridge that Ignatius would have walked over. There are some pilgrims. I stole that off of the website, full disclosure. And you might be tempted to walk right up into the cave since it's right in front of you, but you should probably go straight ahead to the pilgrim's office and get your credentials stamped. I always say, make sure you turn around and look at the work and admire your work, because that's where you came from. It's lovely. And there's a pilgrim's office. You'll see there's the symbol there on the ground. You can always find it. They're really gearing up. There's your it's a certificate. It's not really a Compostela like you get, but it's similar to the Compostela you get in Santiago. But they're gearing up for the 500th anniversary. They have a whole website, Manresa 2020, a whole Ignatian trail, etc., that you can avail yourself of. We dropped our things off at our Airbnb and headed back down to the sanctuary. And this is the International Center of Ignatian Spirituality. Through the chapel, and it's so bizarre, the contrast. You're walking towards this simple cave where he lived, but it has been completely redone in Baroque ostentation, but it's a reflection of the times, I guess. And this is where, you might be able to, if you time it right, if you have a group, that you can have a mass in the cave. You can visit the hospital where he was volunteering. And this is the Chapel of the Rapture, where he fell into a coma for about 8 days. Oops, what happened? Oh, I just deleted something. There we go. There's the chapel. You can visit, take a rooftop tour up there. It's an old industrial town, an old textile town, hasn't really recovered fully. It's very different from entering into Santiago. But before you go, if you're of the mindset, you could see what they have on offer at the center. It's amazing what they offer. Healing wounds is one of their workshops, building self-esteem. There are weekend Enneagram workshops, contemplative prayer workshops, and of course they have a 5-week course where you stay there and you do the exercises for 5 weeks. So, like I said, it's not like the joyous, arrival in Santiago with the buzz of all the humanity flowing into the plaza and the tearful reunions, but you still have to return home from Manresa. And I say, you have to go through Barcelona to do that. So you have a space where you can maybe celebrate. It's about an hour bus or train ride. We took the train because you cross right over the tracks. You can see exactly where to go, where to get the train when you're arriving at the center. And for those of you who've never been to Barcelona, this is quite the city. Once you explore it, you'll see why it is such a huge draw for tourists. It's colorful, it's walkable. The beachfront, which was not really there until they had the Olympics. This was all redone for the Olympics. That's the W back there in the background. We actually rented bikes to see all the greatest hits. The Ramblas with its swarms of humanity, but this is where you want to watch. This is where you'll find the most crime in Spain, the pickpockets. That's about it in Spain. So you have to be mindful there. The Gothic Quarter, serpentine streets are great to explore, but be mindful of it and your footsteps at night because the partying never stops in the Gothic Quarter. So I say don't stay here because it's 4 a.m. and they're still going strong. I love the University Quarter, spectacular. And then there are the markets. This is the most famous, St. Josep, the Boqueria, but there are like 10 of them. So if you're a foodie, they sell everything from fruits and veggies to fish, very fresh fish, meats. I always say go into the back of any of the markets and you'll find where you can have all that fresh fish cooked for you. One of my tips is just punch this into Google Maps, put Mercat in there. That's the Catalan word for market. And these are all those markets. So the most famous one is the Boqueria here. Is that it there? I think, yeah. But there are some in every neighborhood and they're a gas to explore. And then of course you have Barcelona's most famous resident, because he wasn't born there. I'm having a mind blip. Sagrada Familia. Oh my gosh, I can't remember his name. Diggity dang. Gaudi. I kept having Goya in my mind. So you can go up to Park Güell. I dragged John on a tour of all his residential buildings, which are stunning, especially if you're raised on Dr. Seuss, I think. And then of course, the number one thing so if you've walked the Camino de Santiago, this is his bishop's palace in Astorga, right? But here is what he's known for, is the Sagrada Familia, yet unfinished cathedral. And this is the first thing I suggest you do when you arrive in Barcelona, is to reserve tickets for this, because you don't want to wait for hours in line and then still maybe not get in. But this is what it looked like. Well, this is clearly a stolen photo off the internet, but this is what it looked like when I was there. It was so beautiful that when I walked in, I started to tear up because I have never seen anything like it. And like I said, the photos don't do it justice. So having seen all these Gothic cathedrals, become a little bit immune to one of these. They're beautiful, but then you come into this and it's just breathtaking. So, and then from Barcelona, you're like an 18-minute bus ride to the airport. And from Boston, just about an 8-hour direct flight. And there you go. We're at the end. There's your website if you want to write it down. I had a handout to give. So if anybody wants that, I can email it to you. And so I will stop the recording and stop the sharing now because I think we're done.
Yay! That was awesome.
Oh, I'm ready.
I know.